You deserve a tech career you love, coworkers you can count on, innovation you're proud to build. If you're ready to change the world through technology, explore a career at Cox. Make a real impact in engineering, development, cybersecurity, and more, all while experiencing work-life balance, flexible work options, and great benefits. Visit cox.career/tech to find a job you love today. That's cox.career/tech.
Welcome to Alien Theorists Theorizing. We got a special interview episode tonight. I'm Braden.
I'm Zell.
I'm Dan. And I'm Andrew.
And tonight we have one of America's leading connoisseurs of the bizarre. I thought that was the greatest line.
It's a good title.
Great title. He's an author. He's written several books, including The Big Book of Mars in 2020, Chasing Ghosts in 2021, and just releasing here in October, We Are Not Alone, The Extraordinary History of UFOs, Aliens, Invading Our Hopes, Fears, and Fantasies is right up our alley. So welcome to the show, Marc Hartzman. Welcome, Marc.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Hell yeah. Yeah, this is when your publicist reached out, just a glance at the title of the book, and I was like, we got to dig into this guy real quick. This is right up our alley.
I think it was more the title that really intrigued. We're like connoisseur of bizarre. That's a great. We were trying to in our heads trying to figure out who other connoisseurs, could we name other connoisseurs of the bizarre?
We're coming with top 3 lists, top 3, top 5.
If we had to list all the connoisseurs of bizarre, we know who we had. There's a guy named Tim Scullion who's a ghostographer, photographer, and we're like, yeah, okay, he's on their list too, a connoisseur of the bizarre. But we love the title.
Well, Ripley himself would be the biggest connoisseur.
I'll tell you what, if the list was long enough, would we not be on that list?
We could be on a lot of lists somewhere, right? If you include the lowest tier of all those lists. Anyways, Marc, so how did you get going down this weird rabbit hole of all supernatural, aliens, ghosts, all this stuff? What got you going?
I mean, this is something I've been interested in since I was a kid. I had those Time Life books, The Mysteries of the Unknown, the UFO volume. I bought Communion in the late 80s. So I've always kind of been interested in the topic, but it wasn't really until The Big Book of Mars that I started writing about UFOs. There's a section in that book where I get into the UFO craze that started in the late 40s, of course, which this book gets more into, the new one. And just the idea of people believing that those might be Martians. So I touched on it in that book, but there was obviously so much more to dive into that it deserved its own book. So that was really sort of the genesis for We Are Not Alone.
That's awesome. So you've always been interested, and as soon as you start, you're always interested in something, but once you get into it a little bit more, the rabbit hole, you just keep digging down and just go and go and go.
There's so much. And the rabbit hole is what got me going on the Mars book to begin with, when I came across a 1926 newspaper article about a Martian woman named Umaruru who was in telepathic communication with a guy in London. And he believed that there was this Martian and they were trying to send telegrams to her, and this whole thing just blew me. And of course, this didn't work, but he blamed the Earth scientists for not being smart enough to receive them. So as I looked more into that story, I just started finding out all the other stories going on in the periphery about other beliefs in intelligent Martians. So all that, again, just led to my interest and really got me going on what eventually became We Are Not Alone.
That's awesome.
So where are you finding these stories? Do you find these in the tabloids, or where did these pop up?
Well, that particular story, just looking through newspaper archives online, which is great. You can type in, I found that story actually by accident. I was looking for a story about Nikola Tesla and his attempts to contact Mars. And I just kind of stumbled across that headline. And again, I fell down that rabbit hole. But yeah, it's been great. I mean, a lot of research for We Are Not Alone. Besides old books on the topic and interviews, there's a lot you can find just searching through newspaper archives and finding different articles about different stories, finding what different people were seeing and reporting, which gives you a lot of great colorful quotes and lots of unique stories as well. it's fun. I love going down those rabbit holes of those archives. It's a bit of a treasure hunt.
Yeah, Dan loves it too. We always send him down, sometimes alone.
Yeah, very little
Dan,
equipment.
Go find out what you can.
Small bit of food.
He's our parakeet, right? So we see how he fares
Peter, isn't it
when he comes
canary?
back.
It's a canary.
Canary?
Yeah.
It's a canary, I think, buddy.
What'd you call it? A parakeet?
Parakeet?
Is that a bird too?
Yeah, they're all.
Yeah.
I mean, yes.
I'm sure it's the same. I'm sure it's
Canary
the
in the coal
same
mine? Is that-
effect.
It's parakeet in the coal mine, apparently.
Yeah.
I was like, I guess you can buy parakeets at your local pet store as opposed to.
Hey, listen, we should be referring to Mark, though, shouldn't we? Aren't you the trivia king, from what I understand?
This is true.
That's right. We wanted to touch on this. We heard you maybe won some money on Wheel of Fortune.
Oh,
This is probably the most important part of the interview.
yeah. You were saying trivia. I was like, I mean, I'm okay.
Oh,
Yeah, no, I did really well in Wheel of Fortune.
That's awesome.
So it was a journey I never expected I would be on to be on Wheel of Fortune. It wasn't one of my life dreams, but my kids urged me to try out for it, and I made it on, which was again like something I never expected actually happened. I didn't know what to expect that day, and I did really well. I had incredible luck. And I won a good amount of money on the show. I went to the bonus land, and unfortunately I missed that, but I did really well before that. So that was a lot of fun. And Pat and Vanna are incredibly nice, I have to say. That whole team is amazing.
They've been doing it long enough.
Yeah. It shows you understand why. Like they're so good at what they do.
Fantastic. Your book, We Are Not Alone. Like we went through that. We were lucky enough to get some pre-release copies and get to go through them. And it's like fantastic. One off. Like I loved it. Like I really liked it. The way the book is put together, and for most people, like I'd love to pick this up as like just for reference material in the future. Like I just put it on my shelf or in my Kindle and be like something I can refer to later. It's a great chronology of just UFO phenomena, like starting from the very beginning, like all the way into like modern day, like up until like Arrow and like a little bit beyond that. But yeah, one of the questions I kind of had, because the book covers all this stuff, and I'd like to ask somebody who's like done the comprehensive research on this thing. I think, when do you think was the definitive shift between the UFO abduction phenomenon, where it was like, hey buddy, hey pal, why don't you hop in our UFO and we'll take a spin around the solar system, and then it changed to, hey, we're gonna have hybrid babies with you whether you like it or not.
We're going to put stuff up your butt.
yeah.
That's an interesting question. So I think there's a few moments, right? So the 50s is maybe, I think, the most entertaining time period from that standpoint.
Agree.
Where you had this group called the Contactees, and that's when you had just these different guys who were writing lots of books and holding lots of lectures. It was almost like cult-like. They'd have these followers who would come and they'd give these lectures. They'd have conventions, and they would talk about meeting usually Venusians. Venusians were very popular. A few Martians, but it's one of the times when Venus seemed to be a bit more popular actually than Mars. And of course, the Venusians all look like humans. They were very humanoid, often had blonde hair, and were very beautiful. Males and females were both, sort of ideal. And they would talk about going on these flying saucers, and some of them it was almost like they were trying to one-up each other as the years went on. So first, like, I met a Venusian, and then I met a Venusian and I got on the spaceship or the scout ship and then the mothership. And then I flew to Venus, and then I married a Venusian.
I was about to
and
say,
then I married a Venusian, and I had a child with the Venusian. And then there's another book, I think I showed in We Are Not Alone. There's a book that was like my journey to the moon, the Mars and Venus, like
Oh, we were on a roll.
That was good.
We were on a
It
roll.
was dead smooth.
So, I mean, you have all this going on. And then, they're describing mostly the reason that these people are visiting, the space people. And generally speaking, that was all kind of based off of the atomic age. So it was mostly aliens coming to warn us that the atomic age was very dangerous and we might blow up our planets, and they want to kind of save us from ourselves. So messaging wise, it's a good message, whether it's from aliens or not.
Yeah, don't blow yourself up.
Be careful, right? So that I thought was a good message. On the other hand, it starts to really kind of create that stigma of UFOs being a bit for more like kooks versus serious scientific study. So that kind of puts science, derails science a little bit in the subject. But then in the 60s, just to kind of get back to your question, by the 60s, you have the abduction cases starting. So 1961 saw the first sort of documented nationally case with Betty and Barney Hill. Although I talked about a case that happened months before in June of 61, but that wasn't documented at that time. That came out later. So then you have abduction starting. People are now saying, "Oh, I was abducted by aliens. I was taken aboard their ship." In some cases, they're probed. Betty and Barney were both probed before they were released, and then had these memories kind of come back through hypnotic regression. So I talk about that case, a few others, and then the hybrids kind of start coming in. I'd say more like in the 80s. You start getting all these stories about hybrid children and babies, and I have a great story about a camerawoman from Baywatch who claimed to have been abducted many times. She was telling me this story at the MUFON convention and said she had hybrid children. She met one of them, came to her house in a spaceship, and she was a camerawoman, but she couldn't get to her camera equipment in time to get photos, which is a shame.
I mean, it happens.
But I loved hearing her story.
You got to set up. Takes time.
Yeah, that's basically what she was talking about. She had a lot of equipment in the closet that was locked up. But she said she would tell me how the crew from Baywatch, like David Hasselhoff, would ride up to her and ask her about her abductions. And, they all knew about it. So there was one day when she was late, probably because of an abduction, and the producer ran her to the beach, like, "You got to come see what we've got at the beach waiting for you." And they had these radio telescopes up all across the beach. And the idea was they were filming an episode about alien abductions. So that's actually an episode of Baywatch now, based on
crossover.
Yeah, no doubt.
UFOs in Baywatch. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's great. So I love, like, regardless of what you believe about the story, that's now part of pop culture. Thanks to Baywatch. So I thought that was cool. So I think it's kind of like almost by decades, it just gets more and more advanced, I guess you would say, in terms of our interactions with aliens. And again, all that kind of is also sort of adding to the stigma, which now we're starting to get past, although there's certain things happening that might start interfering with that once again.
What are those? Let's go down that. What do you think that is?
Well, so this is just something I kind of noticed recently. So, 2017, the New York Times released an article in December that kind of broke open the secret Pentagon programs that were studying UFOs, or unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP now is what they're called. So again, changing the nomenclature to sort of separate themselves from the kooks I was just describing, basically, right?
Right.
And so that really kind of made it more acceptable to start to think about this topic in a different way. And really from a standpoint of national defense, right? Like, this is when we released the Tic Tac video from the Navy. You had all these comments from the Navy pilots who were seeing things all the time, not just those few videos that got released at that time in December 2017. So suddenly people are starting to take it a little bit more seriously. We've had the congressional hearings over the past few years. But then you have things like it was just last week or 2 weeks ago now, we had the guy in Mexico present these alien corpses to the Mexican Congress. So all of a sudden it's like you have NASA looking into it. They had a press conference the next day, like the day after that incident in Mexico. So you have this seriousness with NASA. You've got Avi Loeb with the Galileo project. So you have these serious scientific minds taking it looking into it now. And I loved when the guy, I think it was the administrator of NASA, said he's trying to take it from sensationalism to science, which is great. But then you've got the guy in Mexico with these, looks like
Jamie Mouse,
mummified ET or petrified ET,
Mexican journalist. Jamie.
Yeah, and so it's like, okay, so are they coming out of the woodwork again? And is it going to start to blur the lines between what's serious and what's not serious, and make people wonder? So yeah, it's sort of interesting to see where that might go. I'd like to see the seriousness.
There's a buck to be made, right? And like part of the thing I even worried with NASA getting involved is they're like, because it's being serious. It's just like, well, if there's money to be made, like, yeah, we'll do this, but we need more funding. Right. And so I think it's kind of one of those things where it's a toss up of people are like, well, people are interested. There's genuine, serious interest, which means that we could, do these things and get more funding. Whether we use all the funding for this or we can use that money in other places as well, remains to be seen.
It kind of feels like though, like the Mexican aliens were used to delegitimize the movement, though. You know what I mean? Like it just looks so hokey.
It seemed like it was like a planted story to derail it.
Yeah.
Yeah, or
right. That's what I'm saying. It's starting to like interfere.
Book.
Yeah, that makes.
Those are the same ones. Those are the same mummies that we talked about like last year. Those are the same ones. Those are from 2017. This is the same freaking dolls that they picked up.
Repurposed. They repurposed them.
Yeah. Same paper mache fucking aliens.
They put a new coat of varnish on them and they're good to go.
Fresh spray.
It's interesting what you said about the funding, though. That I had a line, when I interviewed Avi Loeb about who wrote the book Extraterrestrial about Oumuamua, which was that interstellar object that floated through the solar system, also in 2017, interestingly enough. And he talked about, there's a famous line from Carl Sagan who said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which, yes, that makes total sense. But Avi expanded on it and said, well, extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary funding. Right. And that's been something that's really been lacking until it's starting to change now. And he's actually gotten so many private donations, he's been able to build out, a program and has about 100 scientists working with him. He's got the equipment and he's got the status and obviously the knowledge. So, that's where you start to see like a potential for some real learnings.
Did he give you any inside information when you interviewed him? Because we've had him on the show before and he wouldn't give any hard answers on the aliens. But I feel if he got him behind closed doors, he might tell you a little more.
I mean, he's just looking for more data, but what's great about him is one, he can actually collect his own data now. He's got the means to do it. But he's so open-minded, and that's something science hasn't really had someone who's been a leader in that sense, with that open mind and that curiosity to find out and to look closer to home. So I think he's really in a unique position to make a difference. And, it'd be great to see, like, will we learn something? Maybe that data shows it's not, maybe we learn it's not aliens at all and it's a more natural explanation, but that's great too. At least we know and we learned something in the process. And I think that's really the important thing is we find out what's either going through our solar system or what these things are that Navy pilots are seeing is it some other sort of technological artifact? Is it some other line of physics that we haven't discovered yet? That's happened in the past. There's a thing, NASA actually mentioned this in their document they released at that press conference a couple of weeks ago, where years ago, pilots used to report seeing things in the skies, which they just couldn't identify. And we found out later that these were called sprites, which were basically lightning that shoots up from clouds. We didn't know that happened before. That part of physics just was unknown. Now it's known. Now pilots don't report those anymore. So, you never know like what we might learn that resolves things and we start to get a better understanding of, where we live and the planet around us.
I went through that report as well, and then I was going through there. I was like, "There's a whole category of phenomena named upper atmospheric phenomena named after like mythological creatures because there's like elves, gnomes, a couple other ones, which I thought was pretty interesting coming with it. But to on the part of like funding, I think it's going to be more of a challenge for NASA to secure the kind of funding where it's like you can say yes, people are interested in this topic, like that there is a massive public interest about UAP, but that doesn't translate very well into whoever's writing the proposals for funding. It's like, well, people really want to know about this, and government's going to be like, well, why are we going to? So. Like, we don't care. How does that translate into something that we can use?
How do we make money?
Where I think, well, not money, but it's like, how are we going to use? How is that data going to be useful to our country as a whole? And it's going to be like, I think NASA was really kind of hyping up the idea that it's like we talked about it, and one of them at the conference made they made the comparison of basically being like, okay, if you can't. There's two ways you can find something. And we talked about this, like a needle in a haystack. Like there are two ways you can find it. You either make a very accurate and very like a very accurate model of the needle so that you can go through and you can find it very quickly. You're like, okay, this is exactly what the needle looks like. This is how much it weighs. This is how whatever. But we don't have all that information about UFOs. So the second best thing is like you make a very accurate model of the haystack or just our surrounding, like you said, like our planet as a whole where we live. If you make a very accurate thing, then you can look for the abnormalities within that, and then you can work with that at least. So it's like, I think they're going to kind of, they're going to be like, okay, we're going to make really serious, accurate models of like weather phenomena and stuff, which can be used for, charting planes or, weather models, these kinds of things or whatever. So it's like when they get all that stuff together, I think they'll probably get funding or better funding, hopefully.
And I think that the funding is also, the funding I think is also critical because, since this story broke in 2017, basically the government's acknowledged that there are things in our airspace that they cannot identify, right? So they don't know what they are. They acknowledge that again with NASA. They said I think they kind of had some ideas of a few things, but still they said we haven't identified this phenomena yet. We're still working on it. But basically, they have a responsibility to try and find out what these things are, right? If pilots are seeing things in our airspace and we don't know what they are, that's a problem. Whether it's aliens or foreign power or something, it becomes a matter of national defense, and that's reason to fund it to find out. So they need to learn something about these. They can't ignore it because that could really come back to cause a real bigger issue.
The interesting thing to me is too, because like we've met a lot of people. We've been to alien cons and stuff, and met experiencers and stuff. And you kind of like, I always kind of say like, when someone gets in front of me, you can kind of like, I can come, my bullshit meter will go off whether or not. But like
bullshitter
some of the people,
knows a bullshitter for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Bullshit.
Yeah, Bob Gimlin, totally legit, greatest guy ever.
Totally
nicest guy in the world.
Nicest guy in the world. Fire in the Sky.
Travis Walton.
Travis Walton.
Bullshit.
Yeah, we met him.
Suspect.
But like we've talked to like Kevin Day, who was on the Nimitz, and like the guy like teared up, like and like how vindicated he felt. And it's just like listening to him talk, you're like, how can you listen to this guy? And then just like, I just do not, there's so much sincerity when he tells his story as a radar operator and just being like, we saw these things and no one believed us. And like, there was no avenue for them to like properly report these things. So it's crazy to me to think that like, we've discounted so many people, and it's like, how many great stories are still out there that we just haven't heard yet.
Or
it's very compelling when you hear them talk that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
now
like
that brought me
the stories who haven't, like not necessarily that we haven't heard about, but it's people who haven't told yet, who have been holding on for the stigma. So eventually, this kind of breaks down those barriers. There might be someone on the ship. Maybe there's someone with a video, and there's been waiting for the right time. Like, listen, this is a legit video. Analyze. Let's go. Because that's what we're missing. Because we've had all of these, so many cases where they claim, like Bob Lazar and Jeremy Corbell and these guys claim that they reverse engineered and worked on these craft, right? And it's always been they're like, oh, he never worked there. He's lying. And then someone like, no, there's the employment record. He worked there. And you're like, okay, well, which one is it? And then he also says that they have excavated alien craft. And that guy says he doesn't. So it was one. We got to know. So if that's under the curtain, and like these hearings, like David Grutch, and these kind of like opening the way to that. It's just if they're there, if they're real craft, someone has some documented evidence, or can show you where they are eventually, if they're there. And then once that's there, if that's ET, that is huge reason for not just national, just Earth defense. Right, that's like that's the Ronald Reagan Star Wars thing. If there was a threat from outside this planet or whatever,
yeah. If there's a threat from outside this planet, maybe we'd all learn to get along better.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to fight
which
each other.
is very true, and maybe that would do some good right now. But I would love to see some evidence of these things that Grush was talking about, or that Lazar has been talking about since the late 80s. It's hard to know. It's like he seems very sincere when he talks as well. Mm-hmm. But again, it's just all you have is this guy's statements, right? That's all we have. That's the only evidence. And if it's there, it seems like maybe that will come out. Maybe that will come out sometime soon, or it won't because maybe it's not there.
But they'll keep.
It'll certainly keep you curious.
Yeah, they'll keep telling you it's coming.
Yeah, right.
Now, when doing all your research and everything for this book, and just as your passion, is there any like, what is, one case that like pops to mind where you're like this certain UFO case, had the X factor for you, where you're just like, there's, maybe there's so much weird stuff going on, or like coincidences lined up where you're just like, you know what, this is like a really interesting one that I think more people should know about. Is there one that pops to your head?
There's a couple. So if I can give you two examples, one is lesser known, one is a little bit better known. So one of them was in the mid 70s, and this was seen by a friend of mine. His name is Lee Spiegel, who sadly just passed away last month. But he started investigating UFOs in just before then, like mid 70s, early 70s, and he was working with J. Allen Hynek, who of course was the astronomer who was working with Project Blue Book from the late 40s till 1969 when the project ended, and then he continued on with the Center for UFO Studies.
When it ended,
he had kind of gone from
renamed.
He kind of went from from skeptic to someone who believed that there might be something to everything.
Right.
So he kind of changed his attitude over time. And so there is a story about sightings in North Carolina, in Lumberton, North Carolina, of a sort of a triangular shaped UFO just going over this county. And so he couldn't go. So we sent my friend Lee Spiegel down. And so Lee took a plane down to North Carolina, met with the police chief, and they go out driving, following reports that were coming into the police station, and they're looking for this thing, and they're not seeing anything for a while. And all of a sudden they see it. And he told me that they eventually pulled off the side of the road where they saw it, along with a few other people who gathered. So it wasn't just him; it was him, police. I think a couple police officers, and maybe a few other just passersby who stopped to see it as well. And this triangular UFO lit up, perfectly silent, about treetop level high, so not that high up, very visible to him. And it was just sitting there above, and it flashed a light at him, like right at his feet, and he could not explain what this thing was, and then it zipped off, and they tried to follow up, but they couldn't keep up with it after that. So this is hearing something from a guy who I've known for years, again, makes it a bit more compelling. He's so genuine about it, like the way you talked about Kevin Day, like he talks about this thing, like there's no doubt in my mind that I saw what I saw. He had other people who saw the same thing, and no reason to lie. He wrote up his report. He looked into the different possibilities in the area, checked with the local, Air Force Base. Did they send up something that they may have seen as some sort of testing or whatever? There was a test that happened, but it happened after the fact, not when they saw it. So it came, after the sighting. So he ruled that out. And again, it made no noise either, which was very unusual. And no one's really explained that particular sighting. So I find that one very unusual, and again, left without an answer. A lot of times there's a pretty good, reasonable answer that people can find, whether it's a weather phenomenon or some other sort of military test or whatever it might be. But this one remains unknown. And the other one that's kind of similar to that, but on a bigger scale, is the Phoenix Lights from 1997, where you had about 20,000 people see something that sounds very similar, a giant triangular UFO just sort of passing overhead over town, over Phoenix. And again, you have thousands of people seeing this, including the governor, who at first kind of mocked it, but later admitted that he'd seen it and went out to get a look and had no idea what this thing was.
Yeah, didn't he hire like an actor to wear like an alien costume to come out in the press conference or something?
Yes. I have a picture of it in the book, actually, from the newspaper. Yeah, so he was kind of mocking it. The guy came out like one of his aides, a giant, goofy, mask on and alien gloves. And they kind of laughed about it. But yeah, later he came out. I was like, no, I did see something, and I don't know what it was. And it's another one that remains unexplained. I mentioned one thing in the book where there's a guy who ran an aerospace company, talked about having created a triangular type of craft. It was like a high altitude balloon. So it would be silent. And he said it wasn't ours. Possible that someone stole the technology and was testing it. But again, that's just pure conjecture. No evidence toward that. So who knows? Again, it's weird that if it was being tested, why no one could acknowledge that at this point. It's been 26 years. So that one to me is also very compelling.
Yeah, the Phoenix Lights, they didn't they try and debunk it by saying it was like some like type of warthog planes and they had flares at night, and you're like, it seemed too unison and too constant to be like a military training operation.
Exactly. Yeah, there were flares apparently that night, but I think not quite right there. And yeah, just what people saw did not line up with the behavior of flares. So everyone who heard that, who'd seen it, was like, "That's ridiculous. We didn't see flares. Like if we saw flares, we would know, or we know it was, it couldn't have been that." So again,
they always try and
they had a story, but no one was buying it.
They try and debunk a lot of these sightings with something that seems so ridiculous, like, oh, a flare, or this experienced pilot just seen Jupiter flash off his mirror and he thought it was a UFO, so he chased it for 10 minutes, radioing the tower, saying, "I've got unidentified aerial threat." And they're like, "You've seen Jupiter." He's like, he's been flying for 20 years, but he just seen Jupiter in his lens.
Yeah, had a meltdown.
Yeah. Right. Even Kurt Russell actually saw the Phoenix lights. He's a pilot, and he was flying a private plane with his son. I think just the two of them. And they saw the lights as he was flying into Phoenix. And he reported, he called them, he said, "I don't know what they are. There's I think he said he saw 5 or 6 lights. I forgot. I have stories in the book, but he saw something unusual and he called it in. And, he came out years later to tell this story.
If Snake Plissken sees something,
you listen.
You listen. All right. Like, that's no joke.
Now, Mark, we kind of briefly touched on how the evolution of the abduction and hybrids and stuff, but what do you think that is? Say that's real. Say the abduction is real. What do you think? These ETs, in your opinion, what do you think that is? Is that a scientific experiment? Are they evil, or is this just for research purposes?
Well, if it was real, I would lean toward the latter. I would say that. Yeah. So if it's real, I would say, to me, it seems like it would be science, because we're still here. So if they were evil, I gotta think we'd be wiped out by now. If they can get here, they have the technology and the means to get here. Surely they can overpower us if they chose to. So I gotta figure that if they're grabbing us, they're trying to learn more about us. People who believe this particular theory would say that they're trying to repopulate maybe a dying planet with these hybrid children. Maybe there would be something to that. But to me, it seems like it'd be more an educational venture.
What about everyone's favorite show, Ancient Aliens? What about the Anunnaki, these ETs as our God, our creator? They took chimpanzee DNA or some type of hominid and altered it, and now we're here.
So, well, a couple of thoughts on that. One, if all that's true, I like the idea presented by 2001 that they came and somehow bestowed intelligence upon humankind, right, and then took off and let us develop. I find that to be an interesting thought. I kind of like that idea. But in terms of more ancient aliens, where they're coming, they're building the pyramids and they're building these other equally seemingly impossible structures with the monoliths and so forth, that or the stones that weigh tons, that how can anyone move them? I struggle with that thought a little bit for a few reasons. One, first of all, I think it just sort of disregards the ingenuity of humanity. And I talked about some of that in the book. For example, they recently had found that there was another strand of the Nile that actually floated by the pyramids. So to have floated materials by actually could have been quite feasible. Not easy, of course, but feasible. So again, manpower and human ingenuity, I don't think we should overlook that. On the other hand, consider what we're doing now with our own space program. So we have robots on Mars, right? We've sent robots there. Before we send humans there, we'll 3D print habitats. We'll have things ready to go. So we'll bring our own technology and use that to help us survive and do anything on Mars. I have to think that if aliens were coming here, they would have done something similar. I don't think they would have just come here and then just rely on some rocks that they found on Earth. It seems like they would have brought something, or they would have left something behind, or they could have done something more with their own technology, as opposed to just, well, here we are, let's see what kind of rocks we've got, and we'll just make the best of what we have. That to me it seems hard to believe. Again, just kind of basing on what we know about ourselves and what we're doing currently.
They got here and they're like, you know how we impress these monkeys? Put rocks in piles, big piles. The bigger the pile, that's how they like it. That's how they like them.
Yeah, they probably could have done something a little bit more impressive back then, right? I know we'll be doing more when we start the Habitat to Mars. It looks amazing.
Now, what about, I got another question I want to ask you, because a lot of times these UFOs seem to be, they call it like transmedium. Like they're in the air, they're under the water, they come from the water into the air. So we've talked about before, like theorized about, there's people on Earth who still probably don't really know what an airplane is. They're completely disconnected, like still tribes deep in the Amazon or in the middle of the Congo. So there's us on this planet who is a completely different species. And we've talked about before, like maybe there's like a advanced race of another type of being, this interplanet, like they're under the ocean or they live in the planet or something. And that's where they're not coming from space, they're coming from inside. Did you ever come across anything like that?
Kind of like the gods must be crazy. I mean, I've heard these kinds of stories, but I like that analogy of like, you know, the tribes that have never seen an airplane, like the gods must be crazy, and the Coke bottle falls out of the plane, and they, you know, they wonder what this magical thing is, you know. So sort of taking that and extrapolating to us and seeing something we've never seen before, we might have the same kind of wonderment. I don't know. I mean, you know, look, the ocean is largely unexplored, right? Like there's a lot of unknown, you know, far below where we can't really reach. So could there be something there? Who knows? I mean, to me, it seems a little unlikely. I feel like we could find some evidence just through, you know, whatever, you know, radar systems, whatever it is that can kind of detect things. But
well, not if they're guarding the entrance.
I suppose there's a possibility
in Antarctica. They're guarding the entrance to the Hollow Earth.
The Hollow Earth, I have a little I struggle with that idea. It seems a little.
It's fun though.
A little bit of a reach.
guarding the entrance,
but certainly people believe that. Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked
now with those.
I think it'd be.
Go ahead, Brad.
No, with that, I'm just like, what are your thoughts on like if these things are coming from somewhere else? You know, Zell did mention the transmitter. Like, what would, you know? Have you ever given any thought to like how these things can do what they do? Like, you know, there's some that seem to enter the ocean and leave, you know, instantaneously, right? Have you like, what's your personal thoughts on it? Like, do you think they're coming from somewhere else, different dimension? Like what through your research, like do you lean one way or the other?
Well, for me, it's a little bit easier to grasp the idea that there could be intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, right? Like the numbers alone, you know, you figure the odds are there's got to be some life elsewhere. And you're seeing that, like the imagery that we get from the James Webb Telescope is just phenomenal. It reminds us of how expansive the universe actually is, and how many stars and how many exoplanets there are. And you hear more and more about these exoplanets that are sort of within what's called the Goldilocks range, or the Goldilocks zone, meaning that its distance from the star is like Earth, so maybe it could support life. Now, whether or not that life can grow and gain intelligence like we have, and then begin to study the universe around it, that's hard to say. Also, just kind of trying to imagine if that's the case, does it actually line up in the timeline that we exist in right now, right? Like we're like such a tiny blip in the timeline of the universe over 13 billion years. So what are the odds that there's another place somewhere that had life evolve and grow intelligent at the same time to be able to get here? Or how long would it take to get here? By the time it gets here, is that planet even still in existence? You know, the distances are so vast, it's hard to comprehend. I mean, 1 light year is over 6 trillion miles. 6 trillion miles for one. And talking about places that are like thousands of light years away. So then the question becomes, on top of that, like, let's just say that those other things are true, like life did form and it does exist within our basic timeline realm. Then the question is could they overcome those distances? And it's hard to think that, like, it's hard to imagine that right now for sure. But on the other hand, if you look at how how advanced they could be. Like if they are 500 or 1,000 years ahead of us, it's hard. It's like, it can't even imagine what might be possible, right? So like, look at us 100 years ago. Like what we're doing right now would be insane to anyone.
It was sci-fi back then. Sci-fi.
Dude, even 20 years ago,
box and they'll see each other.
Like 20 years ago, with the invent of like just the smartphone itself, like just having like an entire house's like worth of appliances, like a radio and television and the recorder, video, everything in the palm of your hand. Just when they made the flip phone, just the flip phone, you're like, well, that's the end. That's amazing. That's it.
We're peaking at Motorola Razors.
Motorola Razor was the peak.
That's what you saw in Star Trek. You're like, that's what they have in the 24th century.
What more could there be?
Yeah.
And then just 6 years later, there's the first iPhone, and then since then,
and now we're back to flip phones.
Now people got sick of that. Yeah, they get rid of the tech. Flip it.
Right.
Yeah. So
exactly. You see the acceleration, and it just keeps getting faster and faster, right? So, and it is hard to imagine what more could we actually make, but it'll keep happening. So that that's an intriguing line of thought. That like, okay, well, if they're a little bit ahead of us, if they've evolved faster, maybe they found a way to overcome that distance. And if so, then it's not hard to get back to your question. Then it's not hard to imagine that they could do the things you were describing, like zipping into the ocean, zipping right back up, not having a visible means of propulsion. Why couldn't they have figured something like that out? They can get here.
Yeah.
So again, these are the questions that, we have no idea the answers to, but they're fun to think about and theorize about. So it's certainly possible.
It's why we bash our heads against the wall every week.
Yeah.
There's something new comes out. What was it? Just last week, I think NASA or one observatory has started announcing that they had found evidence of carbon dioxide production on Europa, which is pretty interesting. Which possible indicator of life, within there, because we don't know what's under Europa. Europa is just a big ice ball, we know that there's oceans. Yeah. We're pretty sure there's oceans underneath there, and it could
Europa is fascinating.
That's probably one of the better candidates for life here in our own solar system.
I agree that ice cap is 10 miles thick, and then the ocean is far deeper than our ocean. So yeah, exactly. Who knows? I still think they'll find at least microorganisms under the surface on Mars. I wrote about this in the Big Book of Mars. They had positive results for life on Mars in the 70s in the Viking mission. I don't know if you guys knew about those tests.
That they had the one, and then was the bit where they talked about like, they might have messed up and they heated it too much or something. I think I can't think I remember about that.
NASA basically said it was probably an exact chemical reaction, but both landers had the same positive results for this particular test.
Well, it makes sense.
That basically showed
right, it makes sense. There's water. There is a slight atmosphere, right? It's very slight, but there is there is air of some kind. There's water and ice, and you dig down a bit, and who knows? We have just on this planet. We have
get away from solar radiation.
We have stuff that lives in the mouths of volcanoes and eats sulfur. Like now they're finding what is that? Chernobyl. They have this new bacteria that eats radioactive matter.
It's crazy.
They're like, stuff evolves. It evolves everywhere.
Extremophiles are an interesting category of organism. Like you're just like everywhere. Life is everywhere.
Tardigrades.
Even the one
so it's
the one experiment that they did where they had the sealed box and they put water in it on Mars, like with one of the rovers. Like scientists are now saying that like, there's a pretty good chance that if there was something there, they just drowned it. And like and that's why you didn't get the reaction they wanted. But I remember reading that article a couple of weeks ago. They're like, it's time to like do some updated tests on the surface of Mars.
Yeah. It'll be interesting when they get the samples returned. The Perseverance rover is collecting samples which should be returned to Earth mid-2030s, I think is the target. So that'll be interesting. I talked about in We Are Not Alone, I talked about other tests other ways that we can learn about the potential for intelligent life on other planets, which are technosignatures. So there's biosignatures, which is a little bit what you mentioned earlier, like seeing carbon, evidence of life, right? There's carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, something that can show that life might exist. But intelligent life might be shown through something, a technosignature, which would basically be like something like pollution in the atmosphere, pollution that could only have been created by something that was created artificially, versus like lightning can create like nitrogen dioxide, for example, but only certain amounts, whereas machinery could create that in much greater amounts. So they'll have another telescope that will follow James Webb, and that one will start to be able to detect things like that in years. And so they can start to combine data, and that might give them the sense that, like, okay, if the data lines up to something that could not be explained through like a climate model of that particular exoplanet, it would be indicative of something having created something on the planet, meaning some intelligent life. On the other hand, I also talked about, this was from a NASA scientist. This is all his theory, which I loved. But he mentioned that even if we find evidence of technology on another planet, it doesn't mean that there's intelligent life on that planet. Because again, look at Mars. There's technology on Mars and there's no one there because we put it there. So then the question would become, okay, well, who put it there and where'd they come from? So again, the questions just keep coming up. But again, all kind of fun things to think about and potentially learn about soon.
Let's get there. Come on, Elon. Get some people there. We need some boots on the ground.
Yeah, let's get it going.
Yeah, because we also talked about that phosphine gas that was on Venus, and then there's then we theorized about the wind cities, like just on giant sails, and you just float in the atmosphere because it's the only part of Venus which is habitable because of the temperature. Because
for us, I mean, it would be, people's most like scientists and astronomers say that like Venus would be relatively habitable for us. Like it would be comfortable above the clouds. Like below the clouds, you've got like, fucking just mercury, rain and everything. Yeah. Just no way.
You're melting.
But if you float above the clouds at like a comfortable level, it's like, they're like, it's actually pretty nice. Like you would just put yourself on a big balloon, city, blimp, whatever, and you just kind of float around. Yeah. I mean, it's possible. Like even just a research platform. Yeah.
Yeah. The Venusians from the 50s didn't say anything about any of that, though.
That's true. That's true.
Now, do you have any thoughts of why, some of these experiencers seem to be targeted throughout their entire lives? Multiple experiences, sometimes, in certain accounts with the same beings. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, do you have stock? Is there some that you believe in? And do you have any ideas of why they'd be interested in this, like in like a certain person throughout their lifespan?
There's definitely stories like that. People will, usually it's something that comes out through hypnotic regression where they realize like, oh, this thing I remember when I was a kid, now I'm realizing that wasn't like a dream or whatever. That was actually an alien, coming into my bedroom or whatever it might be. And eventually they get abducted and there's an abduction story. So there are certain cases like that. I mean, I guess, again, you'll get from both sides. If the abduction thing is real, then again, maybe scientific experiment would explain that. You'd want to follow a particular subject and learn about that subject. It's not unlike a documentary that might be made here, that follows the progress of someone's life. On the other hand, is there something just going on with the mind? The mind itself is another, fascinating place to explore that we know very little about. And so who knows what might be going on just inside that's causing different kinds of thoughts, beliefs, memories. There's actually, just to step back to my last book for a second, in Chasing Ghosts, there's a really interesting experiment that was done. I think it started in the late 80s by a professor in Canada who he devised this thing called the God helmet. And he put this helmet on. He'd have volunteers go into like a room where it's completely sensory deprived. And this helmet had...
was it a hockey helmet?
Was it a Jofa? Modeled after a hockey helmet, yeah.
There's some sort of modified...
It looked like a motorcycle helmet or a football helmet.
Mm.
Because of Canada, right?
Yeah. He probably wasn't a real Canadian.
Yeah, he was an import.
That sucker was a hockey helmet. The prototypes were 100%.
But he would send these electromagnetic pulses into the temporal lobes, and he could dial up and down like the intensity of those waves. And people would come out and they'd have these experiences. They'd say, some of them said they saw ghosts. That's why I was in my book, Chasing Ghosts. There's a lot of them that thought that they saw like ghosts of some sort. Some thought they saw God. Again, that's why it was called the God helmet. And then others said they saw UFOs and aliens and had these experiences. And so what is it that's going on with electromagnetic waves and how they affect our brains? And that also goes for other phenomena, things like infrasound, which is, I think it's like 18.9 hertz. It's a wavelength that you wouldn't detect it, but like horror movies actually use it because it makes you feel scared. It affects your system. It makes the eyeball vibrate. Again, you wouldn't feel that, but it's doing it. So people see shadowy figures from the periphery of their vision, which they think are ghosts. And the guy who kind of figured this out this was, I think, late 70s, he started studying this in various places and found it to be in like old cellars, narrow hallways, like places that were sort of tropes of ghost sightings, right? So who's to say that there aren't these different natural phenomena that's affecting our brains in ways we just don't sense at all that might cause these different kinds of thoughts, feelings, memories, beliefs. Again, this is just pure theory. But the mind is a pretty interesting place that remains, like I said, largely unexplored and maybe accounts for some of these things as well.
What you're saying, actually, I think it tracks, even if you just think about it, like going back, like a lot of religious sites and stuff like that are all based around caves. They're based around areas with like strange acoustics and things like that, or strange acoustical properties. So, possibly, inducing visions and those things would become, a mite bit easier in these locations, and they would be considered, holy or places, but, this
sure.
is what ferment like a connection to the divine, I suppose. And
we're all looking for answers to things, right? Like we always want an answer. So you like, okay, well, maybe it must be this or it must be that. In lieu of having science to explain it for us.
Yeah. And it's just like, but like you're saying, like having like, it's just unusual physical properties of our world that is actually, or interacting with it is just something that is causing these visions, or making a connection to this. It's just like, oh, it's something for me, it's like, even like the search for divine always and like aliens and stuff like that. It's really about a pursuit of just knowledge in general. And like, even if it's not, some of these events, if they're not even extraterrestrials, it's still like, we're going to learn some cool stuff along the way. Let's go. So,
exactly.
I find so all that stuff is kind of I think what you're saying, that kind of tracks. Let's just be like, oh, maybe these things are, everyday phenomenon, they're happening all around us, but we just haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah. And again, it comes down to like, so a lot of this to me is like Occam's razor, right? Like, which seems more likely, that there's something here going on that we don't know about yet, or that something has figured out how to traverse thousands of light years and gets here and remains unseen largely, or hidden as it wants to be. I don't know. So again, like, it's all possible. But sometimes maybe the most likely answer is maybe the correct one.
Yeah, which is always alien.
But it's all fun to think about. That's what I love about it. And I love the mystery of it all. We don't know.
Interdimensional,
so it keeps all those possibilities open.
Frequency beings that can teleport in and out of this dimension at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
Boom.
So Mark, you brought up Chasing Ghosts, which I got sucked down the rabbit hole in that one pretty hard. And we do a little thing in October called, it's a little hacky, but we do Spooktober. So we kind of just talk about more like, obviously spooky things, which lines up with your book pretty well. So I was wondering if I could ask you a couple questions about your last book.
Yeah, of course.
So a lot of the cases in your book, including the Fox sisters, which kind of is credited for launching modern spiritualism, end up becoming either like proven hoaxers or admitted, right? So I was wondering if you, for example, had one that you thought like stood out as opposed to the rest of them, and you really liked and thought like held some water.
Oh, it just froze on me.
We froze.
Oh, the tables have
Sorry, I
turned.
lost you if I had one I thought.
Oh, how
Yeah,
the tables have turned.
The turntables. Yeah, just which case do you think was the most legitimate? Which one do you think, that you couldn't really come up with either, two young girls with arthritis cracking their knuckles or,
There is one that I thought was pretty amazing. This was, I think late 1800s, early 1900s. Leonora Piper was a medium, and she did not claim to be communicating with the dead, but she would go into trances, and she would speak about certain things. She would tell people about different things that she was learning in this trance, right? Or that was coming to her, however you want to describe it. And she would do a pretty good job of describing certain events that there seemed to be no way she could possibly know. Again, this is like turn of the century, so there's not like, she didn't have like an earpiece, it wasn't like some tricks that might be common in more modern times. But there's one example that I gave in Chasing Ghosts where someone who was in the circle with her and was getting some of this information, she had said, I think that like an aunt had just passed away. This was happening at this point, but it was Northeast, and this death had occurred, maybe like the Mid-Atlantic region, maybe Virginia or something like that. And so he said this woman had passed away, and a couple of days later, the guy gets a telegram or notice in the mail, or whatever, that says that relative did in fact pass away.
Oh wow!
So how did Leonora Piper know something like that? So there's cases like that where, and again, she said like I don't know what's going on. I don't claim to be a spiritualist. I don't claim to be a medium. This information comes to me. She said, for all I know, it's coming from the living, which kind of aligns with the idea of ESP, which that thought came a little bit later. But that one I thought was pretty interesting. That was a hard one to explain. She did have some thoughts that she said that were kind of outrageous and ridiculous, which gave a few examples in Chasing Ghosts, but that, kind of throw that off a little bit, like, okay, maybe she just was saying stuff and she got a couple of hits, right? So she just had some luck that people said, oh my God, she got that one right. And that's the one to hear about. So there could be some of that at work, but that one I always found pretty intriguing. There were so many other mediums that, what I love about those stories is the things they could do. The Fox sisters were like, they just started with the knuckles, like you said, the joints cracking. But these mediums got so sophisticated in the things they could do. And generally speaking, these were like housewives who were figuring this stuff out somehow on their own. They weren't magician apprentices who could learn from these other people. They were just figuring these things out and completely, baffling scientists. And these guys would study them and have no idea. And, maybe part of that was that they had, these egos of being smart, intelligent men. And they couldn't possibly be fooled by, a woman in the late 1800s. Maybe that was part of it. So they were easier to fool in that case. But still, they were pretty extraordinary for what they could produce.
Well, it's amazing how many people kind of bought into this. Like a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, even I think it was, didn't Abraham Lincoln have spiritual advisors come into the White House, and he was warned about John Wilkes Booth supposedly pre-assassination?
Yeah. Mary Todd Lincoln was a pretty big spiritualist, so she would consult with mediums on they'd come into the White House, and I think she tried to get Abe to come join. I don't know if he ever really did join the seances or not, but there was a story where a particular medium who did come into the White House did try to warn Lincoln about the assassination. And of course, Lincoln knew that, there was a lot of stuff going on. It wasn't shocking that he might be a target. So I don't think it was, like, oh my God, I haven't heard that before.
Yeah.
But it turns out that this particular medium was actually a drinking buddy of John Wilkes Booth. And John Wilkes Booth was also into spiritualism and liked working with mediums. So I think he had a few too many drinks, and he told this particular medium about his plan. And then I tried to tell Lincoln, like, no, seriously, the guy just told me what's going on.
Has nothing to do with
I don't listen to your ghosts, buddy. Beat it.
I'm going to the theater. I don't care what you say.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing story.
Yeah, that is a cool story. And another one I found really cool in your book was the story of Harry Houdini versus the Witch of Lime Street. Like that could be a movie.
Oh yeah,
Sounds like a movie.
yeah. There's a whole book on that called The Witch of Lime Street, which is wonderful. But yeah, I cover that in Chasing Ghosts, and Houdini was a huge. He really tried to expose as many spiritualists as he could. Before he really became famous as like the Escape King and all the amazing stunts he did spiritualist tricks. So he would hold these sort of seances, and then he got he got angry at himself for doing it because he didn't like the idea of deceiving people who were grieving. He thought that was just wrong, right? Like a magic show, you pay your money, you're going to be entertained by a magician. Whereas a seance, you're paying your money and you're actually believing that this is a real thing, right? So he would go exposing mediums all the time, and he would, stand right up in front of a, seance and say, "Oh, here's what you're doing," just try to ruin their business. That said, he was hoping there might be some legitimacy to it because he would like to have contacted his mother. So he held on to this hope, but he also knew all the tricks and he could figure things out. Obviously, because he was Houdini, right? He was the best. So there was this woman, Marjorie, in Boston, who, again, this was a housewife. She was she had a son through her first marriage. She was on her second marriage. And she needed to keep her husband's attention, basically. He was a bit of a womanizer. He was into spiritualism. So she starts learning some spiritualism stuff. I think there were some books in the house that she's reading. And she starts holding these seances in her home, mainly just for her family. Her brother had passed away in a horrible train wreck just before all this. So she'd have her mother come up and she'd create these, this effect of like her brother coming back. And I think it was comforting her mother. So it was kind of like just a private thing, like keep my husband entertained, keep my mom feeling a little bit happier, get over some of the grieving. And then the word got out and people started coming to investigate her. And there was this contest being held by Scientific American, excuse me. And they were looking for a real medium that they would pay all these, luminaries in the scientific world who would come investigate. And if they determined you were legit, you win the prize. So Houdini was on that panel, but as Houdini, he was a busy guy, right? He's performing and he's traveling, all these things. So he misses, I think, like the first 40 visits to Marjorie with this panel. And they come back to like, Houdini, like, she's legit. We've got a winner. We're giving her the prize. And Houdini says, no. You can't give her the prize until I investigate myself. Like, otherwise we'll be the fools. We'll be a laughing stock of the world.
So he's kind of like, this is like Who's Got Talent. He's the Simon Cowell, just like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, he's going to be a little more critical, right? So he goes up there and he's all prepared for everything. And of course he starts to sense what she's doing and figures out a few things, but not quite everything, which is interesting. I think that she was probably his toughest opponent, if you will. And so there's a story I have in the book where he builds this cabinet for her. It's like, imagine like a big wooden box with a hole in it cut out for your head to like pop out of, and then like two holes on the side where your arms kind of can dangle out, and your feet can kind of stick out the bottom. So basically you don't have access to your arms. So you can't be doing things in the dark. You can't be, you just don't have access to stuff that you might without that box. Because that's what mediums typically did, is they'd find ways to use even one limb to create a bunch of different effects, unbeknownst to everyone else. So there's a story about how they brought in this cabinet and they found a carpenter ruler that kind of like unfolds. So it's like, maybe like 6 or 8 inches, but then it can unfold to like 36 inches or something, for example, right? And Houdini said, you put that in there. See, that's how you're going to do it. You're going to use this carpenter roller to like reach over and make a sound or tap something or whatever it might be. And she said, I didn't put that there. You put that there to frame me. And of course, it's he said, she said, no one really knows. Years later, an assistant of Houdini's claimed that Houdini had him put it in there. Maybe out of frustration. I don't know. Again, this is a story that's been told. But it's a pretty amazing story, that the sort of the battle between the two. I actually got to talk to the great granddaughter of Marjorie, who was pretty fascinating, gave me a few amazing images to include in the book. But she had some good stories about Marjorie and what she was going through with her life, and even the fact that I think early on she was in her seances, she was writing Japanese, but I think her butler was Japanese. She's like, maybe she learned it from him. So she had a few fun theories to go along with how she may have been pulling some stuff off.
Awesome. Well, hey, Marc, you're a legend. Your website, Weird Historian's awesome. Like all those little side stories and short stories you have posted on there.
Is that a man
Thank
chicken?
you.
What is that?
Oh, on the logo?
Yeah, it kind of looks like Donald Trump a bit.
Yeah.
What is that?
Got the jowls.
That's an image I found from one of the early stories are up for weirdhistorian.com where it's I think it was a rooster with a human-like face.
Okay.
That must have been from the 1800s. I love that image. It was like just spouting off a bunch of weirdness to me.
Yeah, I love it.
Awesome. Well, yeah, the new book's called We Are Not Alone. Is that going to be available on Weird Historian, or where can people go check that out?
Yeah, it'll be available in any bookstore you go to. So should be Barnes & Noble, any local bookstores you go to, Amazon, bookshop.org, any place you buy books, you should be able to find it. Launches October 17th.
I just pre-ordered it.
Boom.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Dan, that's going to be a new UFO encyclopedia of the show, so we're excited.
It is good. I really like it. I really enjoy it. It's got tons of stuff in it.
And if people want to follow you personally, do you have Instagram, Twitter? What do you use mainly?
Yeah, I mostly Instagram, so I'm just at Marc Hartzman, MarcHartzman, and also the same thing on Twitter at Marc Hartzman. You'll find a bunch of fun stuff there, and at Weird Historian as well. You'll find some good stuff.
Weird
there
Historian. It also has a podcast with the same name. He's going to get back onto it. He told us though. It hasn't been up.
I'll get back to it.
There's
eventually.
you still got some great episodes in the bank there, so that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a damn shame that you're not on it more. So hopefully more people get on it and you start using this medium as well, because you're a personal guy. We love guys like you in the field, right? Easy to talk to,
good storytellers,
right? Level head. You're not easy. Yeah, good storytellers, and you're not you're not coming on here selling us flat earth or
you got a great background. Even your backup background was amazing. Braden's not going to have 3 years
I've got nothing
of regret.
You come with all the credentials, Wheel of Fortune winner. Like, I mean,
this is a beauty.
You're doing the public a disservice by not being out there and talking to more people.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all the kind words, guys. Right. This has been a lot of fun. Okay, I'll have to get back to it soon.
Hell yeah. We'll put all your links in the podcast description. We're going to take a short break for everyone watching or listening. We're going to let Marc go here, and then we'll be right back.
Dude, the book, but honestly, he sent us a little, like a preview.
Yeah.
I crushed that book. It was fucking easy. Easy read, fun read. It wasn't like a fucking
lots of pictures.
Yep.
Yeah. Good anecdotes and little interesting tidbits. A lot of cases we've done, but it was just refreshing, to read and from someone else's perspective. It's cool.
I didn't read a lot of it, but from what I read and what I gathered, it was it did a really good job of tying all of it together, kind of just here's from the 40s. Here's all these cases. This is how it's progressed. This is the current state. Is how it's going to go in the future. It does a really good job. It's a good encyclopedia. Nicely.
Yeah, it's a good chronicle, of just UFO, alien, extraterrestrial phenomenon. Like I said, he pretty much said it kind of goes by decades. And that's why I asked him that question. I was like, when does it change from these fantastical stories of visiting Venusians and joining the intergalactic, your George Van Tassel's joining intergalactic Ministorum, whatever, and then it gets to, hey, we're gonna put stuff up your butt.
Careful.
What changed?
Here we come.
The interesting, because I'd like to say we're kind of everymen, you know what I mean? We're average guys, right? And it's
you're an expert.
Speak for yourself.
You're an expert.
Right, I wear glasses.
When you look into these things and you go through all these cases, I do really find that people with kind of normal people, we kind of all end up in the same kind of bandwidth of belief where you're I believe something's going on. I have to some of this other stuff. I just need a
little more, just a little more,
right? It doesn't add up, or then so it's kind of interesting when you talk to these people. I'm like, man, he has kind of the same beliefs that I do with a lot of these things. I fucking believe there's aliens. Do I believe that every story here? Nah.
Yeah.
They're
bugs.
It's
a bug.
Very few stories we hear, but there is some believable ones. Just like the Blue Book, what it was like 95%, mostly explained pretty easily by some such and such, but there's 5% like, nope, no idea. Doesn't make sense. We have no idea.
Yeah, for me personally, it's always been just about an exploration of the unknown. And it's like what you find along the way, because it's always been, that's how science is done. It's just, you find something really weird's going on. You're like, how does this work? And then you just kind of gather up, clues as you go. And even if you're explaining something as like lightning, it's not thunderbolts thrown from Zeus. It's actually just static electricity buildup in clouds, that's also pretty fucking rad. I've always just been that. Even if it's like, some of these might be legitimate. These are legitimate UFOs or something. It could be von Neumann probes, could be whatever from different civilizations. Could be, and it's like, and we should investigate these things. And if we get the, time, but like Mark said, it's always a matter of, money, funding, like where are you going to go? I mean, even when we talked to Seth Shostak, did they say like a large portion of their funding comes from private individuals? Mm-hmm. Like they have that one Russian super investor that basically keeps the lights on at fucking SETI. And it's kind of the same thing. But now that you've got kind of government funding on board, you might be able to score some extra stuff to be like, okay,
let's go find some it's cool things. That Avi Loeb has now all this money, because he's not necessarily looking for aliens. He's looking more like defunct alien like probes or technology, something that's just drifting through space and it comes into ours.
Alien archaeology. What did he call it? Archaeology or something?
Something like that.
Astroarchaeology.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. When we start talking about this like funding stuff, the one sad thought that pops into my head that I start thinking is that I think like part of me, like, and I'm not saying this is what's happening at all, but this is just a thought that pops in my head, is that like, because there's a lot of money in the private funding for these kind of topics, that like someone like Avi Loeb leverages that, knowing that there's he can use his credentials to kind of say these things, get a lot of private funding, and then he can fund what he wants, that he normally couldn't be, I'm not saying he's not researching these things, but I'm saying like whatever he is his fascination. He's like, I'll never secure the funding for what exactly I want to do. But if I say this, if I say Oumuamua was a fucking alien probe, all these people are going to flood my fucking Patreon with tons of money. This is going to afford me the money to do my research, and I can do this other stuff on the side to appease my private investors.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing that, you have the kind of, those are the problems and the drawbacks of like, with private funding. I'm not sure what his kind of like proof is going to be, like what are your parameters for success? Like are you trying to prove, and you just say, oh, there's nothing out there. We spent all this money. We didn't find anything. And you might not know
them anything.
And then there's the same thing kind of even with the government funding, though, because it's like NASA's going to be about results. So like they know, like if we don't get results or something, like we're not going to get funding. And that's why I feel like they try to tie a lot of these things, like they try to tie the UAP phenomenon to defense. They're like, it's a defense matter. If it's national defense, the Pentagon, the fucking, Congress, U.S. government, your wallet's open. You're endless, right? I know that's what I'm saying. But the thing is, until now, every time they do one of these UAP things, that Blue Book, Grudge, Blue Book, whatever. Every time they get to the end, the military's like, well, they're not here doing anything, so they haven't crashed any jets, so. We don't care. Like we're spending all this money for what? Like what? Why? And I feel like but every time you tie it to national defense, or you tie it to like, hey, maybe it's not aliens, but it's another country doing this, then the purse strings loosen, and then they're like, yeah, give you all the money. Here you go.
The Russians, you say? Here's some money.
The money. Chinese, you say? Money. Here you go. Just fucking throw money at you. And even if you don't find anything, you're just like, okay, well, we found some, I think they're just trying to find ways to kind of be like, well, how are we going to prove this? Or what are our results going to look like? So we don't go through all this. And then we're just like, well, you get to the end and they're like, well, you just wasted all this money, even though it's like, well, you gave us the money in the first place.
Have we talked about Charles Davis' story? On the show? I mean, that's like one of the first story he talks about in the book.
Is that the one before Roswell you're talking about?
Yeah.
Or no, the pre-Buddy Hill. Are you talking the 1961 that you mentioned?
No, 1964.
Is that the military guy that got abducted? Are you talking about? I stepped on that they said, "Hey, buddy, get on our ship and fly around." Are you talking about that guy?
And then he went and like talked to a lot of the people that knew him. In where was it? Shoot, I can't remember. I just couldn't remember if we talked.
I don't think we have done that case.
We've done a couple. There have been like, I don't know if it's a specific guy, but we've done a kind of couple that were like that. Like, yeah, hey, get on our ship, buddy.
No, see this had Abby's. That's why I wasn't sure because I was like, some of this sounds familiar, but some of it I was like, I don't. Charles Keith Davis. Yeah, I'm trying to look it up right now.
If not, put it on the list. We'll do it another time.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Not for this month though, because we're getting fucking.
Not for this. It's fucking Spooktober, baby.
Dan's
gone?
taking off. Oh, it's gonna get fucking weird.
Murder.
It's gonna get crazy.
Our blood.
We did an interview today, obviously, so we didn't really have a planned theory of the week or anything.
No, we didn't do theory of the week or Patreon.
Marc Hartzman, theory of the week.
Marc Hartzman, thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
cheers.
Check his book out. It's actually, I mean, there's a lot of bad UFO books. There is, but this one is legit. This one's great.
Yeah. No, it's
cool too. Jason Ghost is good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting stuff. Check this. And the guy's just like he's
a beauty.
He's just like all of us. He's just like all of us. You listening? He's just one of you who's done a little more, and he's gone on Wheel of Fortune.
Well, then he's
so
not
that
like
he has some credibility.
He's way cooler than all of us because he won on Wheel of Fortune.
Fucking way cool.
Yeah. That's all we need. Right, one of us to get on
game
some
show
sort of
winner.
game show.
You won a game show.
Dan,
if you're a game
leverage some kind of credibility.
Dan, get on
Dan's
fucking Jeopardy or something. What are you doing?
Yeah,
I'm gonna get on Big Brother.
Yeah, I'd say I don't want to go. Can I go on one of the fun ones?
Braden would probably win Big Brother because he's just so.
There are like 8,000 game shows now, and you're just like,
you know why? You know what?
I thought about this a whole channel devoted to game shows. Like, can I have Pictionary or something?
I guarantee you. I was like, I bet I could float through the first half of the game. Playing like dopey, like I'm bad at competitions. I can't do anything. Look at me. And then like halfway through the season, I'll just be like, okay, I'm actually good at everything I do. Yeah.
I'm pulling
people
the strings.
Catch on.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. But it'd be too late.
But you're a good manipulator, man.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You'd be good at Big Brother. You'd be terrible at Survivor. You'd be too hungry.
Well, it's because everything. Oh yeah. Every time Braden would do something deceptive, he would look at the camera, probably be like,
Braden on Survivor would just be so hangry, he would just be voted off right away.
Like, can we get this guy some food? Get him out of here.
We feel bad for him.
Yeah.
Anyways, vote to do Braden's submission for Big Brother Canada season 50, whatever season we're on.
Can't we put him on? Put me on MILF Manor or whatever that fucking show is.
Well, yeah.
Or I'll have to check my application status.
Wait, hold on, Dan. I don't think you know.
Dan on The Bachelor.
You and your mom on MILF Manor.
Let's get Dan on The Bachelor, buddy.
Let's get Dan on The Bachelor. Yeah, 100%. That's good.
Why not?
All these fucking 6'3" strapping handsome guys, and then you got
they all like generically, all traditionally handsome like guys. And it's just me.
This little fucking stock.
They have to move the camera. They have to move the camera down. Like they're going across, and the camera over. They have to go down. Dan's 3 of them wide. Hey, it's like Danny DeVito walking out there, just like. What's up?
Yeah. Do you like anime or?
She literally hands a rose over your head to the guy behind.
So you like anime or you're more a tokusatsu chick? Like, what's going on here?
She's like, you wear your hat all the time?
It doesn't come off, baby. That stays on.
Shit, that's funny.
All right, well, let's.
Dan, do you think you get a rose the first night? Hold on, hypothetical. You go on Bachelor. You think you can get a first night rose?
I have no idea how the show works, so I don't know.
So the first night, say there's 30 guys, she's cutting it to 20 first night, just like.
Oh, I can make first cut. I bet I can make first cut.
First cut?
I can make first cut.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Dan can make first cut.
That's pretty fucking bold.
Dan can make first cut.
No, because they'd be like, oh, maybe at least he's got personality or something.
Yeah, he's interesting. he's different.
They got to give give the ugly people a chance. So like the producer would probably step in and be like, "Hey, we got to like make ugly people think that they got a chance."
What you're saying is, what your hopes is that she sees you and goes, "How is this guy on the show? There must be more to him."
Exactly. Yeah.
No, I think the shows are they use these camera angles. Like I think everyone on the show is like 5'6", and they just use like different camera angles because it's easier to shoot. It's cheaper. It's better. It's better for the set.
You gotta teach me how to use those camera angles.
Yeah, well, you're not doing it good now. You got to go shoot from low to high. Right?
Yeah,
right now you're a little high to low.
You gotta get that chin under there.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna head into after hours.
That wasn't after hours. That felt like a whole lot of after hours.
No, it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
We were supposed to get there, but now we're getting there.
We're getting there.
That's a little taste.
Go check out Marc Hartzman book. We Are Not Alone.
Weird historian.
His other books are
beauty.
cool too. And as we always say at the end of these things, keep those eyes on the skies.
See you after.
You deserve a tech career you love, coworkers you can count on, innovation you're proud to build. If you're ready to change the world through technology, explore a career at Cox. Make a real impact in engineering, development, cybersecurity, and more, all while experiencing work-life balance, flexible work options, and great benefits. Visit cox.career/tech to find a job you love today. That's cox.career/tech.